Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we plunge into the most compelling research and surface the insights you absolutely need to know. When you hear corporate charitable giving, what pops into your mind? Usually it's positive, right? Companies being good neighbors, supporting worthy causes, maybe building a new hospital wing? It sounds like a pure win-win. Good for the brand, great for society. But what if I told you that beneath this widely accepted philanthropic image, there's a far more intricate and frankly unsettling reality at play?
It's true. Today, we're cutting through that conventional wisdom and diving deep into what our featured research, particularly by Zhang and Siegel, calls politically connected charity contributions, or PCCG. And this isn't just about genuine benevolence. It's about how these seemingly noble donations can actually become a covert channel for corporate influence. It's a subtle but, well, significant force that can distort fair market governance and quietly chip away at public trust.
Okay, that immediately throws a wrench into our comfortable assumptions. So our mission today is to pull back the curtain on this hidden form of corporate influence, understand its many layers, and ultimately figure out what this means for transparency and accountability, not just in one country, but worldwide. By the end of this deep dive, your understanding of corporate giving is going to be seriously expanded and perhaps, a little more cautious. Let's get into it. So, before we go any further, we really need to get a handle on what we mean by politically connected charity contributions, because it sounds more nuanced than maybe first appears. What exactly qualifies a donation as PCCG?
Yeah, it's a crucial starting point. At its heart, PCCG describes donations from firms to charitable or nonprofit organizations that have clear, identifiable ties to political actors. And when we say political actors, we're talking about a pretty broad network. Politicians themselves, their immediate family members, close advisors, or even key associates. The research lays out three clear criteria for us to consider a charity politically connected.
Three specific criteria. Got it. Let's hear them.
Okay, first, a political actor or someone in their inner circle, whether through family, social ties, or advisory roles, holds a leadership, founding, or advisory position within the organization.
Right. So someone connected is actually in the charity structure.
Exactly. Second, the charity is publicly endorsed or actively promoted by a political actor, often in an official or campaign capacity.
So a politician is out there saying, support this great cause.
And third, it receives substantial funding directly from political actors, their campaigns, or other politically affiliated entities. It's also worth noting that state-created or state-sponsored charities automatically qualify due to their inherent political ties.
That makes a lot of sense. It's really about that web of connections. But you mentioned earlier that PCCG has a kind of dual nature. When I first heard about this, my immediate thought was, oh no, more corporate sleaze. But are we maybe being too cynical, or is there a real dark side here we need to watch out for?
Well, that's a really important question, and it speaks to the complexity. Not all PCCG is inherently problematic. Far from it. It absolutely can, and often does, represent genuine philanthropy. Imagine a company donating to a disaster relief fund that happens to be managed by a government-affiliated agency. That's legitimate effort to help. However, the critical concern, and where our deep dive truly focuses, is when PCCG becomes a covert instrument. It's used to quietly sway policy, undermine fair competition, or secure preferential treatment. The danger lies in its ability to distort fair governance and institutional accountability, all while operating, crucially, within legal boundaries.
Right, and here's where it really starts to feel like a plot twist. Our research introduces this concept of corporate rechanneling. It almost sounds like corruption is constantly evolving, finding new ways to operate. What's the fundamental shift happening here?
That's a perfect way to put it, corruption adapting, almost like a shapeshifter. The core idea from Zhang and Siegel's research is this. As institutional safeguards against overt forms of corruption, like outright bribery, become stronger globally, corruption doesn't just disappear. It simply adapts, rechannels itself, and finds more concealed avenues to operate through. PCCG is a prime example of this evolution, a subtle but highly effective shift from direct bribery to more, indirect forms of corporate influence.
So as one door on overt corruption closes, another more discreet window opens. That's a really powerful and frankly concerning idea, and the research really zeroes in on South Korea for evidence, which has a pretty well-documented history with these kinds of issues, right?
Exactly. South Korea provides a compelling, almost laboratory-like case study. The country has a history of high-profile corruption scandals, including several former presidents and business leaders convicted for large-scale bribery. Yet the 2016 presidential scandal, widely known as Choygate, revealed that PCCG persisted as a significant instrument for high-level influence, even despite strengthened anti-corruption measures. This persistence, despite all those efforts, was a major catalyst for Zhang and Siegel's study.
And their methodology sounds fascinating. They talk about using an exogenous shock to really dig into this, which isn't something you hear every day in research. For those of us who aren't steeped in research methodology, how did that give them such an unprecedented look behind the corporate curtain?
It's quite innovative, and you're right, the term exogenous shock sounds very academic. But think of it like this. Imagine a sudden earthquake that shakes a seemingly stable building. That earthquake reveals hidden cracks, structural weaknesses, and foundational issues you'd never see otherwise. The political upheaval in South Korea, specifically a democratic uprising that led to parliamentary investigations and court trials, acted like that earthquake. It was an unexpected, external event that forced open internal accounting records of two presidents, providing a rare, clear window into corporate dealings that would normally be locked away.
That's a fantastic analogy. It really helps visualize why that kind of data is so valuable. Wow.
Precisely. By analyzing this unique, investigation-based data set, they rigorously examined how firms adapted. Their key finding was stark. Intensified political competition, which typically brings tighter anti-corruption constraints, raises the expected cost of outright bribery. This, in turn, prompts firms to substitute bribery with PCCG. It's a direct, calculated response to a changing risk landscape.
That South Korean example truly paints a vivid picture of this rechanneling in action. But I'm curious, is this phenomenon something unique to specific regions, or does this kind of charitable bribe pop up across different political landscapes globally?
Oh, it absolutely plays out globally, and the research highlights how firms adapt PCCG to incredibly diverse institutional environments. Sticking with South Korea for just a moment, the 2016 Choigate scandal, which we touched upon, revealed approximately $70 million in donations from 53 companies, including giants like Samsung. These funds went to politically connected foundations named Mir and K Sports, ostensibly for culture and sports, but were later uncovered to be, well, basically a slush fund for Choi Soon-sil, a close confidant of President Park Geun-hye.
And Samsung's motivation here wasn't exactly driven by cultural appreciation, was it? Seems unlikely.
Not at all. Samsung, for instance, sought government support for a crucial 2015 merger between Samsung C&T and Chile Industries. This was vital for consolidating control for the heir, Lee Jae-yong. Government-administered pension funds ended up approving the merger, even though it actually devalued the government's own shares. It's a pretty clear illustration of how these donations can pave the way for political favors.
Incredible. And this isn't isolated to East Asia. We also see examples in Southeast Asia with the infamous 1MDB scandal in Malaysia.
Indeed. And in that case, the state investment fund 1MDB indirectly supported former Prime Minister Najib Razak's campaign. What happened was that 1MDB purchased assets from Genting Group, a major Malaysian company, at inflated prices. This led to a potential profit for Genting of up to, I think it was, $619.4 million. Soon after, Genting contributed about $10 million to Yayasan Rakyat One Malaysia, a charity chaired by Najib himself. The timing and scale are highly suggestive of a quid pro quo, you know.
Definitely raises eyebrows. And the reach of this phenomenon stretches to the Middle East, too. The Holy Land real estate scandal in Israel is another example mentioned.
Absolutely. There, a developer donated to Yad Sarah, a charity founded by a former Jerusalem mayor. This was apparently done in exchange for advancing approvals for the large-scale Holy Land project. Again, a clear quid pro quo, just cloaked by a charitable donation. It's striking how these patterns emerge across such different political landscapes, isn't it?
It really is. What's the common thread you see weaving through these diverse examples, regardless of the country?
Well, what's fascinating is the consistent objective. Firms trying to gain an advantage, influence policy, or maybe just smooth over regulatory hurdles. The method, PCCG, simply adapts to the local environment and specific political figures involved. Whether it's a merger, real estate, or legislative favors, the playbook is similar, just the names and charity facades change.
That really highlights its adaptability, and what really stands out is that this phenomenon shows up even in countries with relatively robust transparency laws like the United States. We're not immune to this.
Not at all. For example, back in 2008, defense contractors Boeing and Lockheed Martin donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to a symphony in Pennsylvania. This symphony happened to be a cherished charity of Representative John P. Murtha, who, as a powerful figure on the House Appropriations Committee, held significant sway over the allocation of profitable defense contracts.
Ah, the Mirtha connection. I remember reading about that. And more recently.
Yeah, more recently, between 2021 and 2023, oil companies like Chevron and Marathon Petroleum collectively donated over $800,000 to charities favored by certain California state lawmakers. These lawmakers, notably, were known for obstructing or weakening environmental legislation. The pattern is strikingly consistent across sectors and geographies.
And it even crosses borders, right? The new skin case is a perfect example of that international dimension.
Yes. In 2013, Nu Skin China, a subsidiary of the U.S.-based company, transferred about $154,000 to a charity linked to a high-ranking Chinese government official. This was allegedly to influence an ongoing investigation into the subsidiary. So yeah, these cases collectively demonstrate how companies worldwide utilize charity as a facade for political influence, adapting their tactics to different local and international environments.
Okay, so we've seen how PCCG operates in the wild, almost like a ghost in the system. But to truly grasp its significance, we need to compare it to other forms of corporate influence we might be more familiar with, outright bribery and regulated lobbying. Where does PCCG fit on that spectrum, especially when we consider accountability?
That's a critical distinction, especially for policymakers and corporate leaders striving to uphold ethical standards. While all three, bribery, PCCG, and lobbying, ultimately aim to influence policy, they differ significantly in their legality, how transparent they are, and the ethical risks they carry.
Okay, let's break that down, starting with legality. It feels like this is where the lines get really blurry.
Absolutely. Bribery is explicitly illegal in most jurisdictions. There's no legal ambiguity there, really. Regulated lobbying, on the other hand, is generally legal. It operates through formal established channels, though the rules and enforcement do vary by country. PCCG, however, occupies a far more ambiguous space. It's partially legal, but highly exploitable. It precisely blurs those ethical boundaries because it outwardly resembles legitimate philanthropy.
So not quite illegal, not quite fully transparent. It's like a loophole that's easy to drive a truck through, isn't it? And what about how visible these activities are to the public? How much is formally reported?
You've hit on the core challenge. Transparency has two key dimensions here: formal disclosure and public visibility. With bribery, there's basically no disclosure. It's inherently covert, and its influence is completely hidden. Lobbying generally has high disclosure, often legally required, but the level of detail can vary and the information can be complex, making it difficult for the public to interpret the actual influence sometimes. PCCG sits right in the middle. Donations are often reported, giving it medium to high disclosure, but, and this is crucial, loopholes often exist, and the critical political ties are frequently obscured, making its public visibility low to medium. You might see the donation, but you don't necessarily see the strings attached.
So with PCCG, it's not just that the strings are attached, it's that those strings are often invisible to the average observer. And I imagine that dramatically impacts the ethical risk assessment.
Exactly. Bribery carries the highest ethical risk due to its secrecy and its direct undermining of institutions and fair markets. Pretty clear cut. Lobbying is generally considered to have a low to medium ethical risk. It's an accepted form of advocacy, though concerns definitely arise if it significantly distorts public policy. PCCG, again, is in that medium to high ethical risk category. Its intent is often difficult to discern, and its accountability and transparency are highly variable. It thrives in those legal and ethical gray areas, which is precisely why it warrants such heightened scrutiny.
This distinction is incredibly important because it highlights why PCCG is such a challenge. It's not outright illegal like bribery, but is far less transparent and ethically clear than, say, regulated lobbying. It's a really cunning form of influence.
It is. And for policymakers and corporate leaders, understanding these differences is vital for upholding ethical and legal standards. PCCG's legal ambiguity, limited transparency, and inherent ethical risks make it particularly insidious and difficult to trace without extensive scrutiny, making it a powerful tool for covert influence.
What I found particularly interesting in the research is that this isn't just about a few isolated incidents or theoretical possibilities. The studies provide concrete data that truly quantify the scale of this hidden influence, showing that PCCG is a significant and recurring phenomenon.
That's right. In the United States, for example, research by Bertrand and colleagues estimated that between 6.3% to maybe 15.9% of corporate charitable giving by large corporate foundations, we're talking S&P 500 and Fortune 500 firms between 1998 and 2014, may actually be politically motivated.
Wow. Okay, to put that in perspective, that figure exceeds Political Action Committee or PAYT contributions by over 2.5 times. And it amounts to roughly 35% of federal lobbying expenditures. That's a massive amount of potentially covert influence hiding in plain sight as charity. What does that tell us about the sheer scale of this problem?
It tells us this isn't fringe activity. It's a systemic, recurring channel of influence that's comparable, but perhaps even superior in some ways, to more traditionally recognized political spending. And the Jeong and Siegel study on South Korea provides even more striking numbers. They documented that the vast majority of 45 major business groups donated over $102 billion, which is approximately 120 million US dollars in PCCG, to former President Chun and his spouse just between 1981 and 1987.
That's an astronomical figure for that period. What was the economic context for that?
Yeah, it's huge. And to further contextualize it, these 50 largest business groups accounted for over 88% of national sales and 73% of total assets in the South Korean economy by 1987. This really underscores the systemic nature of the practice there. And the study actually confirmed the rechanneling theory. These donations increased during periods of heightened political competition, strongly supporting the idea that firms shifted their form of influence from outright bribery to PCCG when costs or risks of bribery rose.
So these aren't just one-off occurrences. These studies provide robust evidence that PCCG is a recurring, politically motivated, and quantifiable phenomenon. It's a significant channel for influence that we really needed to start paying far more attention to. Okay, so we've identified the problem, we've seen its global reach, and we've even quantified its scale, which is pretty sobering. But what do we do about it? The research doesn't just identify the problem, it also offers actionable recommendations for policymakers and corporate leaders to tackle this hidden influence. What's the single most impactful thing policymakers could do to bring these opaque donations into the light?
Right, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The key message here is that addressing PCCG requires collective action. It's not just one group's job. For policymakers, probably the most impactful first step to combat opaque donations and hidden political ties would be to establish a centralized national real-time donation reporting system. This system should ensure that all donors, and crucially, all governance ties, meaning who sits on the boards, who founded the charity, things like that, are publicly visible and easily searchable. Australia's Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission, with its public register and annual reporting requirements, provides a useful model here.
That seems like a solid, concrete step. And what about when donations are clearly given for strategic gain rather than pure philanthropy? How do we address that motive?
For that, policymakers should require regular, independent audits of major donations, specifically designed to enforce ethical and legal compliance, especially in things like public-private partnerships. India's Corporate Social Responsibility, or CSR, framework, with its mandatory annual CSR disclosure requirements, offers a kind of precedent. Additionally, strengthening whistleblower protections with robust laws and secure, anonymous reporting mechanisms similar to the EU Whistleblower Directive is crucial. People need to feel safe reporting this stuff. And finally, to combat investigative delays that let these issues fester, funding independent investigative bodies like South Korea's Corruption Investigation Office for high-ranking officials is vital.
Those are excellent points for governments. But what about corporate leaders themselves? What steps can they take within their own organizations to ensure their charitable giving isn't being weaponized for influence?
Right, companies have a big role too. For them, a critical area is strengthening internal governance, especially where ownership structures might be concentrated or oversight is weak. This means adopting rigorous internal audits, strict conflict of interest policies, and mandatory pre-clearance for any politically sensitive donations. Think before you give, basically. Companies should also require 2-year look-back disclosures for any contributions that might influence decisions. And for firms with concentrated ownership, additional safeguards like truly independent audits or public transparency pledges are essential, maybe drawing inspiration from the G20 OECD principles.
So it's about making sure that the internal checks and balances are not just present, but are actually robust and fiercely enforced, not just ticking boxes.
Exactly. Additionally, to combat insufficient transparency in donation processes, companies need to implement reporting systems that specifically flag potential conflicts of interest and disclose any political ties. These systems should ideally be overseen by an independent ethics or audit committee and could potentially integrate with platforms like Benevity for real-time tracking. To address a lack of secure internal reporting, establishing anonymous whistleblower systems like EQS Integrity Line is essential to foster an ethical culture and enable early detection without fear of reprisal.
And given the global nature of this, cross-border oversight gaps must be a huge challenge. You mentioned new skin earlier.
Absolutely. The Nu Skin case really highlighted this. Companies could leverage technology like blockchain, think IBM's blockchain for supply chain, but maybe adapted for donation transparency to track cross-border charitable donations in real time. Finally, And this is incredibly important for strengthening third-party accountability. Corporate leaders should actively consider funding independent nonprofit watchdogs and investigative journalism, like ProPublica. These independent entities can critically scrutinize questionable giving practices, promoting fair competition and enhancing corporate reputation, ironically enough.
These recommendations are incredibly comprehensive, but I have to imagine that actually getting governments to adopt these policies and companies to truly implement them isn't going to be easy. There's bound to be resistance, right?
Oh, you're absolutely right. The research acknowledges that implementation faces significant challenges. Securing government support for greater disclosure and data access will require strong pressure from civil society and overcoming resistance from powerful vested interests. Similarly, encouraging companies to adopt these robust internal audits and quality assurance measures will depend heavily on active engagement from shareholders and institutional investors. It's a battle that needs pressure from all sides to truly shift the paradigm.
We've covered a lot today on PCCG, these politically connected charity contributions. It's clear that this phenomenon walks a very fine line, sometimes deliberately blurring it, between genuine philanthropy and covert political influence. It's a complex challenge with real consequences for market integrity and public trust.
Indeed, it exposes how corporate donations, when they're perceived as pay-to-play schemes, can significantly damage a company's reputation, harm its performance, and ultimately distort fair competition. The actionable recommendations we discussed for policymakers and corporate leaders, paired with robust civil society engagement, offer a tangible path forward to mitigate these risks and counter this, well, insidious phenomenon of corporate rechanneling.
So here's a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over. Our deep dive has shown how companies, in their constant pursuit of influence, are incredibly adaptable, always finding new ways around changing regulations and institutional safeguards. This isn't a static game. It's an ongoing process of innovation, not just in how influence is exerted, but hopefully in how it is uncovered and held accountable. As we learn more about PCCG, what new, even more subtle forms of concealed influence might be emerging right now, even as we speak, that we haven't even named yet. It's a question that reminds us the battle for transparency is a perpetual one.